This is NDTV, and you're watching Classics.
Hello and welcome to the Unstoppable Indian. Every week we take a journey into the life of an outstanding Indian, a person whose talent, acumen and moral example is transforming India. The best, the finest from every field join me, Manvi Dhillon, on this show to share their life story, their journey to success. Some of the knocks along the way, what made them get up and keep going, what makes them an unstoppable Indian. My guest today is Amartya Sen, the first Indian, actually Asian, to win the Nobel Prize in economics. He spent a lifetime fighting poverty through analysis rather than activism. India considers him the Mother Teresa of economics, but the impact of his work has been felt around the world. He's given voice to the world's poor. Amartya Sen, it's a pleasure and an honor. Thank you for making the time.
It's a great pleasure and honor for me.
You're considered a rare example of an intellectual who's had an impact on politics. Your work on famine, your work on poverty, the UN Human Development Index. Of your entire body of work, what do you consider has had the most impact?
I don't know if it has had that much impact. I wish it had more. But, you know, it's a subject dealing with poverty, inequality, underdevelopment in the world, famine, hunger. I mean, there have been engagements of many economists, including myself, and this was a good moment, really, over the last 4 or 5 decades to take on that challenge in a bigger way. I mean, economics had a long tradition of very forbiddingly austere analysis, analytical, mathematical, which had been my own primary field of work, but then the possibility of applying that to making a change in the world is something which has moved a whole lot of people, and I count myself as being part of that wave, and it's been very nice to be part of that wave.
To us, that's really true. You've given a friendlier face to economics. But you know, this is an unfair question I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
Is there a particular part of your work that has been most meaningful to you?
Well, Manvi, there you actually raised a very difficult question because, you know, some of my concerns are analytical, and there, of course, the importance of it is judged by the analytical depth of the problem, the complexity of the problem. Some of my work judged not by that. I mean, some of them, I mean, the Human Development Index you mentioned, you know, that's really, you know, it's not an intellectual challenge to make it. It's to think about some way of separating out a few indicators and then put them together in a way that plausibly produces a combined index. That's not a very intellectually exciting work. So I'm schizophrenic that way. You know, oddly enough, after my Nobel, when they did it, I think on the 100th year of the Nobel Prize institution in 2001, they started a Nobel Museum. And they got from us 2 mementos, and from me they took 2 things. One was my bike, which I had from very early school days, not late school days, but very early in my life. But I had used it a lot to collect data about prices and wages, and even including some about starvation in the Bengal famine of '43. So it was very much a tool of research. The other was my copy of the Sanskrit book on mathematics by Aryabhat, around 400, you know, 5th century AD. And that, of course, is my analytical interest. It was a very inspiring figure. A lot of my early mathematical interests connected with things that he had done. So in some ways, and could I justify my involvement in Aryabhat or my work on social choice theory, which is the main thing that's cited if you went to my Nobel site. I never know why they cite one thing or the other, but it's mostly the analytical work they cited. I think in the 4th page of the 4-page report they came around to famine, hunger, all the things that you mentioned. So I think it's difficult to say one thing because life would be very boring if you just did one thing.
You know, I was just going to actually ask you that because, like you mentioned, the Nobel went for social choice theory, but perhaps the public has engaged with you on welfare economics in a much wider sense. Do you see any sort of contradiction there when you think about it?
No, I don't really, because, if someone asked me, which of your work are of greatest interest to you, that would be a different kind of question, namely, what has satisfied me most. But if somebody asked me, what do you think is of relatively greater public relevance than others, I'd point to other things which are aimed at that. I would point to then famine, I'd point to work on hunger, gender inequality. I spent a lot of time on gender inequality and those issues. In fact, when I first started work on it, in this campus in Delhi University, I was very, it was treated as a kind of amiable eccentricity on my part to be concerned with gender, because people understood that class was a problem, which of course is absolutely the case. But gender was a big thing, and it was treated as a kind of oddity. And in fact, I was one of the founders of the journal called Feminist Economics, and I'm still in the board. And quite often, since my name ends with A, Amartya, I think my gender is confused given the number of writing. I get a lot of letters saying, "Dear Ms. Sen," and my favorite of them is one which begins by saying, "Dear Ms. Sen, they will never understand." And I said, that's a huge compliment. So I think those are work which I'm proud of too, because these are issues that have moved me. I think gender is now taken much more seriously across the world, including in India, which is really a great change. So I think there are two different things. I tell you, Manvi, where you were not unfair in asking me that question, but when you were describing, you said that in India it's seen as Mother Teresa of economics. I don't think the public think of me as absurd a term as that. I think some innovative journalists invented that extraordinarily inappropriate
but
analogy.
But everyone's
well,
fancy.
Because it's so absurd. I mean, if you say a totally absurd thing, then people would pay attention. Because here's Mother Teresa, who had done fantastic personal sacrifice, which I've never done. I've never worn hair shirt. I led a decent life. I've never fasted. I always preferred 2-minute silence rather than fasting as a way of commemorating. And in general, it's not a life I've chosen. On the other hand, Mother Teresa, I'm full of admiration for what she has done. I think it demeans her to be compared with a mere economist who is working away. And I think to a slight extent, it misjudges the nature of the work I've done. You work through the night and trying to make sense of unruly data. Eventually, you can see a system in it. And then suddenly to be told that's because you're a good man and you're making great moral sacrifice. That's not what it is about. It's intellectual engagement.
I will take that back, actually.
Okay,
then.
good. Well, I'm delighted.
On that note, I'll take it back, because that is indeed a compelling argument.
Yeah.
I want to go back, in a sense, to the beginning. And, when I look at your life, it's been spent on university campuses, really
throughout,
around the world. It's university campuses all the way. But Shantiniketan, where you were born, did that have an extraordinary influence? I know it's been well chronicled.
It did, actually, because in a sense the question, I was very lucky to have great teachers too in school, as well as later in college. But the fact that our geography teacher, history teacher, a great Bengali and great Sanskrit teacher, the fact, and a very good mathematics teacher, the fact that they will encourage. I remember even spending some time trying to see whether we can prove some alternative independent way of proving old theorems of geometry, like Pythagoras' theorem. Now, that's a kind of, we know that proof, and why do you want to look for it? But I think the fact that I was encouraged to do that seemed, looking back, a wonderful thing. And I think it was very nice for me to chat and argue, and as you know, in my later work, I tried to emphasize the virtues of being argumentative. But that came quite naturally, quite early. And in a kind of imperceptible way, I was arguing with my parents, my grandparents, and they encouraged it. I think the fact that they were all in the university also made it easier, because that seemed quite natural. like the way a teacher lights up if a student asks a difficult but uncomfortable question, because you have to engage in that. A good teacher should, anyway. And yes, I think being in the campus made a big difference. It's not so much the fact of being born, but being surrounded by people who are of that kind.
You know, you've said that between the ages of 3 and 17, you actually toyed between Sanskrit, physics, mathematics, and then chose economics.
Yes.
Your subsequent studies, undergraduate and postgraduate, was it all one seamless journey? What was that journey like? I mean, was any part of it challenging? Did any of it overwhelm Amartya Sen?
Well, I was always overwhelmed because I was trying to do more things than it could possibly be done.
But you always got good grades.
I got a good grade. Well, in Shantiniketan, people were very ashamed of having good grades because of the fact that it was thought that it indicated you were bookish. And I think I quoted somewhere or other that marvelous statement of one of my teachers referring to a classmate of mine, saying she is actually quite an original thinker, even though her grades are very good. Now, as if there's a contradiction between that. And I think that was a kind of atmosphere. Being very good at sports, which I wasn't. I played all sports, but I wasn't very good at it. I enjoyed them. But that was more in the spirit of Shantiniketan, playing it rather than winning it. I think I did reasonably well in my studies too. I think the reason why there was a problem, because I was also very interested in politics, the whole issue about why are we so poor and why is life so miserable, which is a basic motivating question in economics, not just us, not just of development economics, all of economics. That's true of Adam Smith. That's true of Aristotle. In a sense, it's almost true of the economic part of Kautilya too. It's very concerned with that question. So I think that engaged me, and that was pulling me in a different direction somewhat from pure abstract mathematical reasoning. And I was pleased eventually that I could, some of the work, like social choice theory, I'm very happy about it. I spent more time on it than anything else because it both gave me an opportunity to use some fairly tough reasoning of a mathematical kind to arrive at results.
You've spent so much time understanding poverty, studying poverty, but how do you rate our battle against it?
I think we have done some. I think part of my object in studying of poverty was to shift away people away from these completely meaningless indicators like $1 a day, $2 a day. Those numbers is not worth the paper on which they're written. They mean absolutely nothing. You have to judge it by other things, by hunger, by education, by mortality rate, life expectancy, differences between boys and girls. These are issues about development and poverty and deprivation. So I think there have been some considerable progress in that. In mortality, we were doing extremely well until, of course, the recent burst of AIDS epidemic. But taking out that particular adversity and continuation of some old adversities like malaria is among them. Leaving them out, I think we have been doing reasonably well. But those adversities we also have to deal with too. And that requires both science, it requires economic, better patent laws. We have the most awful patent law system in the world, whereby drugs that can be produced extremely easily at very low cost cannot be priced high because of royalty. But if you're not being able to sell those drugs at that price, it doesn't help the drug company either. We need more rationality as well as equity all around in that system. So there are scientific issues, economic issues, social issues, and above all, an issue of political determination. I think I would say that we have made progress, but I wish it were faster, and it could be faster.